Digital acceleration is here. Health systems are walking the path, but are they in the right direction? Welcome to Patient Journey Pioneers, roadmaps from the top digital leaders in healthcare, who share insights and strategies that are pushing the patient journey to new heights. This podcast is brought to you by Hyro, and I'm your host, Liat Kozuch. Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm honored to host Laura Semlies. Laura is a partner in McKinsey's New York office, and her work focuses on serving healthcare providers in the digital and analytics domain. Hi, Laura.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Great to meet you, fellow McKinseyan. I worked at McKinsey as well, but about 9 years ago. Great to have that in common. So let's start, Laura, by giving some context to the audience, having you share a brief timeline of your journey in healthcare, what your role today at McKinsey entails, and what you're most excited about.
Sure, excited to be here. And first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for including me in your podcast series. It's super exciting to be considered a pioneer in the digital space for patient experience specifically. So honored and humbled to be invited to participate with you. Thank you. Just setting a little bit of context, I like to start with who I am as a human first, because I think that brings a lot of just color to what I bring to my work in this space. So working mom of 3, a wife, a daughter, a sister, and a patient. And I'm all those things first before I come to my role as a healthcare, hopefully an ambassador to the care of the future. So I share those things because I bring each and every one of those roles to my day-to-day and hoping that we can really shape the future for delivering greater outcomes, greater, just investment in the overarching journey that we're all on as humans. So who am I in healthcare? I started my journey, like a lot of us, I think, in wanting to be a physician. I was a pre-med student, and it wasn't until I realized that I actually don't really love blood all that much and just couldn't stomach it. And so I had to figure out a way, how do I stay in this industry that I love and follow this passion of being able to have some interaction with patients, but not on a level of actually caring for them. And so I figured out that I really liked the business aspect of it. So I started my journey in public health and health administration with a deep concentration in women and children's health, and decided that the very first thing I needed to do was get exposure to a lot of different businesses and quickly, or aspects of the industry quickly. So I went into consulting, thinking I'd probably do this for a couple of years, and learn a bit about the macro industry at large, get some tactical experience, build some business skills, and figure out my place in the world. Well, the reality is I loved it. I loved the people. I loved the clients. I loved the pace of the work, and the opportunity to, be both tactical and strategic inside of a single day. So I spent 10 years in that space, consulting, and it only left when I had 3 kids in the space of 4 years. Was trying to figure out, how do I balance career aspirations as a working mom and continue to do really exciting and interesting work, but get off the road a little bit. So I went into industry with a really unique opportunity to work for a client who had several different programs underway in customer experience, specifically, and digital. So that's where I really transitioned from broad-based consulting and drove down into customer experience. So here I am today, back in consulting after about a 10, 12-year journey in industry, doing a ton of things, ton of different kinds of projects that I love to share as we go through. McKinsey, my role is a little bit different. I'm here as a, what I'd call an integrative partner that has, broad and deep experience, both in really at that intersection of where people, process, and tech come together. We call it digital today, but it's so much more than that. It's really where that experience of the provider, of the patient, and operations of a health system really come together, and how do we move the needle to, do something different. So that's where I'm at.
Wow, I have so many questions, but the first that comes to mind is, after having 10 years of that experience, what do you think changed the most between then and now and the digital demands? of patients?
That's a great question. The reality is, obviously the tech is changing and the different and has created new and different possibilities. But I think what has probably changed the most is actually just the expectation of the patient themselves. When I was in this business, probably doing my very first project that smelled and looked and felt like digital, even though we didn't call it like that. We didn't call it that. It was the health system's aspiration to really change the administrative experience for the patient for two reasons. One, it's always a friction point where patients really are coming in for care, and all of the administrative burden, just to get to care, and then while they're receiving it, and then after, was creating, I'll call it a black eye, even if that's not the most sophisticated way of saying it, but it is a black eye on the whole experience. And so the health system, back to back, two very substantial health systems that I was working on, were really dealing with that from inside. And so it wasn't patient led; it was institution led. It was the health system saying this has got to change. And the second component of that was that it had to change, one, because of the, just the friction it was creating, but two, also because of the cost of, delivering the administrative services. So again, it was very, very internally driven. Now we're in an environment where every industry around us has radically changed from what it was, from everything, from how you consume media to how you travel to how you bank to the cars that you drive. Every single industry has changed, and healthcare is still struggling to find that change. And it used to be, even just a couple of years ago, that patients were okay with that. They gave permission to, their providers to be, to not have the same access to data, to not, have all of the, bells and whistles that you come to expect from even your hairdresser. They didn't have those same expectations of providers. And today, I believe that is very different. Patients are making choices based on the digital services that they have available to them, to the transparency of the data and of their care. And that demand is increasing and escalating every single day.
And you are at the forefront, thank God.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also loved that you introduced yourself as a patient as well, because it shows your empathy to the other side. Yes, you are kind of on the back end, right? The healthcare system end of things. But first and foremost, you're a patient who also has, her own expectations, and you bring that to your day to day, I'm sure. So let's go back a bit and talk about a time when you led one of the earliest digital patient experience initiatives in the industry, actually, which is Health Customer Experience. Can you tell us about that before I dive into more questions there?
Yeah, happy to. Well, actually, it's funny. That was actually V2 for me. The project I led right before that, we called it Compass. It was a project up in Boston, and they had a lot of the same looks and feels. But I'll tell the story because I think it's important. We wrote something called The Story of Jack, which, the story was written in 2005, believe it or not, and it was about a patient and their reimagined experience with the date of 2015. So, I'm dating myself a little here, but The Story of Jack was written in 2005 for a patient 10 years from now. And the reality was, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? So the reality was that was a reimagined end-to-end experience for a patient where, contemplate a situation where you could actually use the internet to be able to search and find a provider, and that you could expose learned preferences about that patient and, tee up different kinds of, options for them, and that you could actually see providers delivering on this promise that you could use an electronic medical record to not only share information back and forth with you, but to also communicate with all the other providers in your care team. And you really start to, drive and tease out that what should this look like using all of the modern technology available to us. And, at the end of the day, we were selling a story about what the future was going to look like in healthcare. And we were trying to deliver on the promise that we had some of the technology to be able to do some of those very things today, and that we didn't have to wait. And so that first project was a lot about that, like, selling the story internally and, starting to dig into the tech that we had at our fingertips and modernize the pieces of our architecture that weren't quite ready to deliver on that promise so that eventually we could get there. And so the early project really started off as that core tech modernization so that we could get there, and why we were doing these things, why we were making those investments, and connecting those operations pieces to it. Because if you waited too long for the operations to get engaged and to reimagine what that needed to look like, the tech could never really work. So that was sort of version one.
Right.
The healthy customer experience took was V2, different client, different environment from a macro perspective, different kind of health system. But what I would say that was really different there is there was a second sort of factor that came in, and a new set of words that we were using. I'll say it that way. And it was all around self-service. How do we start to introduce self-service to our patients? And, whether that was, sort of living out the dream of being able to book appointments or be able to offer the ability to pay bills online. And, it was all about those, it request medical records, all about those components and bringing those to life so that a patient could actually be part of the journey in a really tactical way and not, and start to use that from a perspective of, one, reducing the burden on the operations in the health system, but two, use that as an opportunity to sort of eliminate the friction points that were most difficult for patients and providers. We couldn't possibly staff up enough to the place to be able to actually do all of those things and in a timely way and be satisfied, have high satisfaction processes. So right. I'd say that was the flip where it started to really talk about self-service in a different way. And what does it take to really be able to do those things and do those things effectively?
How did it feel back then to just imagine these scenarios?
I'd say the imagination part wasn't that difficult. The part that is really difficult is, getting this interconnected set of systems and the archaicness of the systems that were in our fingertips to the point where they could actually be in an architecture that was open enough to be able to perform in these environments. And the other thing I would say is the culture. I think there's and this continues to plague, I think, digital, is our interpretation of what patients are willing to do, when and why. We still bring a lot of baggage to that conversation. I'll just use the example of demographics. We have lots of people that sit in, I'm going to call it the proverbial front end of the revenue cycle, at the check-in desk, for example, that say, we cannot do any of the things you want us to do with digital at check-in because our population is old. And I said, okay, so tell me a little bit more about what you're feeling, what you're experiencing. And they're like, they don't use technology. Meanwhile, that very same demographic that our folks are trying to convince us don't use technology are the highest consumers of media on their phones. And so why can't we imagine a world where we can use it in our business? I'm not sure. And so these were, there's a lot of just digging out like your cultural beliefs and then adjusting them with reality. And you need to be really super data driven about that. Because if you're not, then the convincing takes a lot longer. And so I use that as an example because I really do think it's less the tech now that's in the way. It's now the culture of medicine, and how do we remove that and actually start delivering on some of these promises.
What else are you seeing that's making it harder on healthcare than other industries today?
I'd say probably two things. One, and I think this is probably going to be a little bit controversial, but there's been a lot of talk and noise.
That's what we're here for, to talk about things.
I do think that there's been a lot of talk and noise about how, COVID really, accelerated the digital movement in healthcare and has put us in a place to actually be able to deliver on that promise. And while I would love for that to be true, I think we saw very, quick and episodic adoption of digital during that time period because it was a moment of need and desperation, and it created possibilities that wouldn't have been created in the natural environment before that. And so what it did give us is some real-time piloting and some real-time demonstration that it can be used, and it can be used for good, and it's great. What I worry about is the environment that we live in now post-pandemic, and our clients are suffering from new challenges. Volumes haven't recovered to the place that they were. Reimbursement, all of the emergency-based anything that was done related to emergency measures to make some of these technologies possible and available to patients. Will those continue? Are they sustainable? Does that allow us to continue to, do telehealth the way we were doing it during the heat of the pandemic? Just labor shortage that we experienced during the pandemic and its lingering effects. I hear people say, we're going to have a shortage, by 2025. We have a real shortage right now. And so what it should be that we're talking about, what can digital do to help us with that moment right now? But digital is still perceived as something in most organizations that's expensive and takes too much time. And so how do we really reshape that conversation and get to the place where you can get to immediate impact and immediate value and start to dig into those challenges? I think is very much on my mind. The other one I would say is just talent and team development. The people who have the ability to really decompartmentalize and demystify digital and bring it to an organization in the most strategic, but yet the most tactical ways. That talent is lacking in the industry right now, and we have a long way to go to develop it and make it accessible to all of the health systems and all of the providers out there. So those would be, the couple of things that I would mention.
And as a consultant and someone who's so kind of knowledgeable in this whole bridge where technology meets healthcare, we're seeing a lot of startups and digital healthcare tools being offered. And I'm constantly hearing from our guests here and, people we talk to that it's very hard to choose which one to actually adopt and to implement into the system. What are your thoughts on kind of how do you sift through the tools that have a bunch of VCs and a bunch of funding and, they prove themselves, but what are the criteria that you kind of go through in actually offering a tool, considering a digital tool to a healthcare system?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to a couple of things. What are your strategic priorities, and how does this tool help you get there in terms of accelerating you there? How clear are you around the impact and the value that this tool is going to bring? And are you able to connect that impact to the pricing methodology of the tool? And inside of all of those things, are you able to really clearly see the ramp to value and the promise of return? And I think if you kind of go through that model, you'll be able to pretty clearly see the winners and the losers in that race, if you will. And so I think that's always my methodology. However, I would say the challenge is that I think a lot of folks can see the aspirational value or the theoretical value of a lot of these tools. However, it's the impact gets really ambiguous. Is it growth? Is it, is this a patient retention play? Is this we're going to avoid cost play? And all of those different, components, you have to be really super clear about, what you expect. And then not only what you expect, but as you start that journey, are you actually experiencing those things? And with digital, I think not dissimilar to a lot of other things, you need some scale to be able to get to value. And I think, one thing that sort of plagues the digital health, sort of ecosystem right now is that it's such a complex industry And that, whether you're talking about it on the level of, the payer provider environment and dynamic, the government dynamic, or you're just looking at how care is provided. And, this service line construct. Well, if you're really going to look at having value, these things need to be meaningfully connected in some way so that a patient doesn't experience 32 tools to coordinate, a single visit. And I think that's where most of the work needs to get done over the next, I'm calling it 18 to 24 months, because until you have, a lot of people call it the digital front door, until you have that, sort of single path to be able to deal with digital identity and coordinate and orchestrate, permissions and how you do and you don't want to be communicated with, and that it's relevant and utilized across all the different digital tools, you very quickly get into the territory of breaking your promise to that patient that you just said, I'm going to interact with you differently. I'm going to know you better. I'm going to use everything you told me to interact with you next. And if you did that, but you only did it for primary care and you don't do it for your specialist, or you very quickly get into this territory of, like I said, breaking promises. And, the cruel and inhumane part of digital for providers, and I don't think this is different in other industries, is you don't get many chances with digital, right? Like, patients might, will download something. They will use something if they see promise, but they're not likely to use it a second and a third or a fourth time if it's not giving them the experience that they want. So, how do you get to this concept of a meaningfully valuable product or experience for a patient that a patient is willing enough to keep going with it. And I think that's been a very tricky balance for our providers. So you go in too small, it's not enough. You go in too big, it has opportunities to let you down, take too much time. And so I think the magic there is around how do you pick the things that go together in a meaningfully enough way that you get to you get to very specific wins for a patient across all of their, sort of experience, and not just like encounter centric. And how do you get deep enough in the moments that are meaningful then, that are going to create some level of, there's more here than just me being able to pay a bill, that I'm going to dig in and I'm going to exert some passion and energy into this.
Right. And also ensuring a smooth journey for your most vulnerable moments. I mean, healthcare and that whole interaction with digital is when the human is in his or her most vulnerable moments, I believe. So it's important to ensure that. And, it's funny, I keep hearing from our guests, I always ask them, and I will ask you too, what is your digital patient engagement wish list? Like, what is your top wish list? And we'll get to that in a sec. But before that, what's hot and what's not today? What is ticking off those boxes of, we have that, we're integrated, it's consolidated, it's ensuring the impact that you want to promise to the organization and to the patient?
Yeah. I think, we're not past the point yet where there's deep enough penetration on things like online booking and search. So those continue to be, really, very, very highly sought after tools for patients to, for patients want them. They want an ability to search for their providers differently. They want depth of provider. They don't, it's easy to find information about, certifications and like where you provide care and, sort of the kind of care that you provide, but it's much harder to find information about that human who's on the other side that's going to care for you. So there's a lot of energy around how do you humanize the providers and share the things that actually make a difference to the patients. Language, diet, pictures. We see pictures and all over the place around. When you go to pick, when you use Yelp, to pick the dinner restaurant. Things like that are going to start popping up in this space, and it's going to start to feel, I think, a little bit more like matchmaking, because it's a relationship that you're trying to build here, and there's a lot more energy around that than there was before. Onto the booking side of things, I think it becomes, how do you create an experience that making sure that you're getting the right provider at the right time, and right being for both of you, inside of that experience. And so drawing, out of the capacity management, work, and do you have the options that you need to create that a patient is actually going to engage, and start to create this sort of, shopping cart mentality so that patients can have, choice and can balance options, as they're seeing them, is top of mind. I'm trying to think what else.
I love that.
I think, the other thing is, we're continuing to spend time on the back end, in terms of transparency of what the patient's responsibility is for a particular encounter. And when I say patient's responsibility, I'm really talking about, the liability that they owe after a visit. And, when I was working with on my last program, one of the things we talked a lot about is that shouldn't start at the back, right? It shouldn't start at the point where you're actually looking for somebody to pay a bill. It needs to be backed up way at the beginning when you're in that search and find appointment space, right? And so how do you expose in a very friendly way what a patient's liability might look like that's informed based on their own personal situation at the moment before they've gone on to book, but also considering the fact that if you share too much about financials in the beginning, you at no point want to deter somebody from seeking care. So how do you balance this transparency with options that don't preclude somebody from seeking care because of a financial obligation? Because that's exactly counter to why we as providers are here. And that nuance is super complicated to get. And it's not just about, here's your copay. How do you do that with empathy, with options, with a sensitivity to, the wallet, and how people choose to use their dollars. So I think there's a lot of energy around, taking that sort of back end function, moving it to the front, but in an entirely new and different way. There's absolutely vendors digital companies that are out there and talking to this. We had a few partners in our hand. I'm going to avoid sharing names, but there are absolutely clients and providers that are innovating in this space every single day, and it's super exciting because it's so not
interesting.
It's
that
not
is
regulated.
Like interesting.
Like this is an area where our most progressive clients that have passion for experience and empathy are leaning in and saying, we're doing this because it's the right thing to do, not because somebody's telling us to do it. And there are digital health innovators that are building the tools to help make it possible and to help bridge those gaps that were really real. If you don't know where a patient is, for example, in their deductible at the moment that they're searching for care, it's really hard to give them a good estimate. And so how do you, how do you lean in to, pull the information that's available to you both from the provider and from the payer quickly in the moment and package it up in such a way that doesn't expose you to risk and allows this patient to make a good choice for themselves. Complicated stuff, but super influential on a patient's ability to seek, receive, and feel good about the care that they're getting.
And, it's transparency that we're getting from other industries anyway these days that is very legitimate. So, why not in healthcare? Obviously, there's protocol, there's privacy, there's a bunch of other layers that need to be considered. My last question around that subject is AI. I want to hear your thoughts on, obviously, Hiro does this and, other vendors as well. But what are your thoughts on AI as a tool being used to do exactly what you were discussing, streamlining, making it more of a smooth process, easing on the staff, helping with labor shortage? How do you view AI as a tool in healthcare?
Yeah, I think it's instrumental to the future of healthcare in a lot of different, in so many different aspects. And, I'll lean in on one that I, just recently was working on with with a client, and it's in the denial space, believe it or not. And so it's a little less, upfront and in the patient experience space, but it's in a space that eventually becomes intelligence for the front end and patient access, and how do you take a good hard look at the data that's coming in from a payer denial perspective and start to anticipate trends and be able to apply, advanced analytics in a way that allows you to take the next step differently with the next 12 patients that walk in the door, so that you avoid, instead of focusing on managing a denial, which has been the history for the last, decade or more, as how do we manage all this influx of denials coming in the door? Well, how do you use AI and machine learning and sort of the tools in your fingertips to prevent denials? So go down the denial prevention path and the root cause analysis, and bring insights to the moment that would prevent a denial from happening, as opposed to having to manage the C coming in. So it's again not it's a little bit more on the administration and back end side of things. But if we do it right and we use those insights correctly, then we should be able to change the experience on the front end with meaningful, direct insights.
I'm curious to know what you, as Laura, both personally and professionally, would think to say to a room of 100 new CIOs, Chief Digital Innovation Officers, just entering the healthcare industry today. What is something you would want to leave them off with?
So for me, I think that for the last bit of time, we have been indexing very heavily. And this is going to sound a little counterintuitive to you. We've been indexing very, very heavily on the patient's experience. And I think that has been at the peril of the provider's experience. And the intersection of what a patient's expectations are, providers have so many of those same expectations, yet they are using tools of another generation. And so how do we bring the same level of technology, expectation, and respect to the tools and processes that our providers are using? Until we do that as an industry, I think we will continue to struggle to get the patient's experience right. And along that journey, we will also contribute to labor shortages and physician burnout and physician experience and situations where providers are splitting care across continuums of care, making it much more difficult for patients. So I guess in summary, I would say, I believe, and I think this is going to be my next, bit in my career, is how do we lean into that physician experience differently? And what, if we, in my prior role, we called our program DPX. It was the digital patient experience in that moment, with the full expectation that that P could mean a lot of different things. And the next P, in my mind, is digital provider experience. And until we get that component, to the same place, I think it's going to be really hard for us to deliver on the next generation and meet some of those aspirations.
I mean, drop the mic, first of all. I loved that. I think you are redefining the true meaning of what it means to be a digital healthcare executive. It's on all fronts, because all fronts have to be matched in order to create this, harmonious flow, and not just for the patient, and not just for the physician, not just for the provider. It's really and the payer, it's all the P's involved.
That's
and
exactly
so
right.
DPX, so I've been hearing that a lot, and you really, define that very well. And thank God we have, experts like you who are so exposed to this world and the trends coming up. I'm very, very glued to the screen. I've been glued to the screen this whole episode, and I really want to thank you for sharing your insights. I mean it genuinely when I say that I think we're going to have another episode, because I keep writing more and more questions down for you. But I'm sure you're busy, leading the future of healthcare. When I have you back here in about 5 years from now, and you're reporting back from, the whole ecosystem of digital in healthcare, what do you hope to be seeing at that point in time?
I hope to be seeing an environment filled with empathy, with choice, with the patient at the center, surrounded by a care team that is informed, collaborative, and armed with information and insights that actually amplify what that patient is able to achieve on their care journey.
Amen. This was so nice, Laura. I want to thank you again for sharing your amazing insights. Really, I had a really good time listening to you and taking it all in, and wishing you really all the best in everything that you're doing these days.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, and I'd be honored to come back. And I look forward to engaging with the podcast myself and hearing all of from all of your other the other folks that you're hosting, because it's this collaboration that is going to bring us to that future.
For sure. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Excellent. Take good care. Thank you again for including me.
Thank you for listening to Patient Journey Pioneers, brought to you by Hyro. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite listening platform. See you on our next episode.